Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to take a look at 7 things all brand podcasts need to succeed. Now, building a podcast for your brand is not unlike any other content strategy that you've used in the past. Whether it was blogs, social media, email, video, or any other form of communication you've implemented to engage your audience and turn them into customers, there were deliberate steps that needed to be taken in order to achieve desired results, right? Now that podcasting has hit your radar as a means for spreading your brand message, let me first commend you for taking that step. A podcast creates a tremendous platform for communication, entertainment, building authority, and showcasing the personality of your brand. In today's world, people interact with brands who aren't afraid to show their fun side. Of course, providing solutions is key as well. But if you create an environment where both are happening simultaneously, you win. If you're in the beginning phases of putting your podcast together or are looking for ways to improve your existing show, let's take a look at 7 things every brand podcast needs to succeed. Number 1, a plan of attack. Big surprise that I would have that at number 1, right? If you've listened to any episode of Pod Theory up to this point, you know you need a plan in order to make your podcast take off. No matter what kind of podcast you're launching, developing your plan is the first critical step. You literally want to evaluate every aspect of what's going to make your podcast come to life and determine how you're going to attack it. This is the time to ask yourself important questions like, what is my why? Why am I starting a podcast? What do I want to accomplish with my podcast? What is the name of my show? What content do I want to feature? What is my budget? How much time can I dedicate to my show? And so on and so on. Now, if you've listened to past episodes of Pod Theory, you've more than likely heard me plug my podcast primer that you can pick up for free to help you in these initial steps. Just visit jasoncercone.com/podcast primer and snag yours today. Number 2, a clear understanding of your target customer. If you understand who your target customer is, it will easily translate to your target listener. This is the type of person who's going to find your podcast most valuable. If they already interact with your brand on social media, through videos, and any other available platform, your podcast will be an extension of that. Understanding your target customer/target listener will play a big role in the development of your content as well. You want to be sure to cater to your target listeners so you continue to attract more listeners cut from the same cloth. If you've ever built a customer avatar detailing all the specifics that make up your client, a similar exercise should be implemented for your target listener. Think of all the qualities that you want that listener to have, and then build your content so it satiates that listener. Number 3, industry knowledge. A big part of the content of your brand podcast should center around your industry. Your goal is to educate your audience and answer questions relevant to your niche with an approachable demeanor. Your podcast will serve that purpose if produced properly. Of course, you'll want to use your episodes to showcase why your brand is the one that can solve people's problems, but you don't want to spend the entire time talking about how great you are. That'll come off as self-serving and will make it more difficult for listeners to relate to you. By showing you know what's happening in your industry, you'll prove to your listener that you're on the cutting edge of innovation, and the trust factor between you and your listener is going to skyrocket. Number 4, personality. You have to be able to have fun with your podcast and showcase some charisma. Remember, your podcast will be a direct extension of your brand. The way you present yourself on your podcast will serve as an example of how your overall brand carries itself. If people don't have fun listening to your podcast, or to take it a step further, engaging with you on social media platforms, whether it be about your podcast or any other content that you post, they'll probably find a brand that does fill those needs. And that's where their business will end up going. So make sure that you have charisma and that you showcase your brand's personality through your podcast. Number 5, the ability to provide solutions. Now, I mentioned this with industry knowledge, but I'm going to bring it up again because it couldn't be more important. People turn to Google, YouTube, blogs, and of course podcasts to educate themselves, to get a better understanding of a product, service, or industry as a whole, and to get answers to their questions. If you're not doing that, they'll find someone who is. It's that simple. Think of any time you've listened to a podcast or clicked on a link because the headline suggested you were going to get the answers you were searching for. And when you got done reading or listening or watching, nothing had changed. How'd that make you feel? I'll tell you how you felt. You were pissed off. Don't put anyone in a position to be pissed off at you. Deliver on your promises and provide the answers that people are looking for. Number 6, a unique value proposition for your podcast. Now, I covered this in full detail back on episode 28 of Pod Theory, so please go back and take a listen to that episode. Your unique value proposition is what makes you stand out against your competitors. In most cases, there will be other podcasts centered around your industry. What makes your podcast pop? Why should someone listen to you? Your unique value proposition will help people understand what to expect when they download your podcast. Be sure to express this in your show's description and carry it out with each episode you produce. And finally, number 7, consistency. No podcast can succeed without consistency across the board. Consistency in production quality, show notes, marketing, release time, etc., etc. As your audience grows, they'll grow accustomed to your standards and your release schedule. If you don't stick to those standards and start taking things for granted, you run the risk of your listeners bailing for a show that does offer consistency. Don't let that happen under any circumstances. Always produce content that lives up to your standards and release it on schedule to ensure your audience gets exactly what it expects. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Pod Theory. As I mentioned before, getting a plan of attack together for your podcast is critical. Grab my free podcast primer today at jasoncercone.com/podcastprimer, and let's take those initial steps together. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.